Thank you, Madam Speaker. And it's interesting that this has come back today after the discussions we actually had on it yesterday. And I'm happy to stand here and speak to this again, because yet again we have the opposition here trying to rewrite history, gaslight Territorians, and actually I think they're trying to mislead this House and also mislead the people of the Northern Territory. Because in the motion it says, condemn the 𝙍𝙀𝙇𝙀𝙑𝘼𝙔𝙇𝙄𝙎𝙏 government for failing to tell Territorians before the 2024 election of its plans to scrap the 10-year program to underground power in the northern suburbs. And I thought I was pretty clear on that yesterday, Madam Speaker, and I think if you go back and have a look at Hansard, you can actually read what I said, but I'll say it again. Nobody on this side of the House and nobody in this government made commitments to undergrounding power in the northern suburbs. The fact that Labor is saying that we did is a falsehood. It is not true, Madam Speaker. It was Labor's plan to do it. Now, as I said yesterday, and I'll say it again today, within 6 to 8 weeks after being appointed as a minister and being the shareholding minister for Power and Water, I had my first meeting with, I believe it was the CEO and the chair of the Power and Water Board, along with some of the other executives. And during that meeting, Madam Speaker, they came to me and said, we cannot do the undergrounding of power for $60 million that Labor had been pushing. They said, we can't do it. We need to stop it. We can't do it. There is more work that needs to be done. All right? 6 to 8 weeks after the election, Madam Speaker. Not prior to the election. No promises from anybody. This was Labor's election commitment. I actually have a press release from the Leader of the Opposition when she was responsible for this back in 2020. And I'll speak to that a little bit later, and I'll probably table that, Madam Speaker, so people have it. But it wasn't our commitment. And for the Leader of the Opposition and those opposite to say that it was, is, as I reiterate, a falsehood. It is not true. Yes, I made the decision to cease the undergrounding of power because there was only $60 million allocated to it. And again, I'll go back through the history like I did yesterday. So the background, the previous government had said they'd allocated $60 million in their last budget for undergrounding of only the high voltage network, Madam Speaker, not the HV and LV, but only the HV network in 𝙍𝙀𝙇𝙀𝙍𝙍, Allawa and Waggaman. And this was reprioritised by our government. Okay, the previous government costed fully undergrounding the power for the northern suburbs at $290 million. Now, when I went back to Power and Water the first time, after I said they asked me and requested me to cease, and I agreed to it and stopped it. I said, go away and give me some indicative costs on how much what it will take to actually do. And their first indicative price came back to me at over $500 million, Madam Speaker. And the caveat on that, Madam Speaker, was that you had to, for economies of scale, to make it cost effective, you had to underground the HV and the LV together. Again, here we have, and it says, I believe, in this press release, it's only going to be the HV network. And since then, Power and Water have continued to do work on what it will actually take to underground all the power, because you have to do it together, otherwise it will cost probably 50 to 60% more. To underground all the power in the 13 suburbs in the northern suburbs is nearly $1 billion. Okay, $1 billion. Now, I agree that undergrounding the power is, of course, a good idea to do because of the weather events that we have here in the top end. I have no issues with that, but we need to come up with $1 billion to do it, and a very, very comprehensive and staged plan to be able to do that. Now, if we went ahead and did it, like Labor want us to do. Let's go and spend $1 billion and underground the power through the northern suburbs. Happy days, off we go. Well, who pays for it, Madam Speaker? Do I have to go and borrow $1 billion? Because that's what Labor used to do. I think, as I said yesterday, they came, they spent, and they borrowed. And that's why we find ourselves in the debt position we are today, because they just went ahead and did things without considering the cost. If we can come up with an appropriate plan that is robust, is fully costed, and we're able to come up with the money to underground the power, then so be it. I'd certainly back that, but I've got to find the $1 billion first. So if we have a look at this press release from the former minister responsible for essential services, I believe, Minister 𝙍𝙀𝙇𝙬𝙖 at the time, now the Leader of the Opposition. It said, 𝙍𝙀𝙇𝙬𝙖𝙔𝙇𝙄𝙎𝙏 and 𝙍𝙀𝙇𝙬𝙬 are programmed to be the first of Darwin's northern suburbs to have the HV overhead infrastructure power lines undergrounded. The rollout is part of the Territory Labor government's $60 million investment over 6 years to underground Darwin's power network. And there's a chronicle order of the 13 suburbs. And guess what, Madam Speaker? Works were supposed to commence in 2023-24 in 𝙍𝙀𝙇𝙬𝙬, and then commence works in 𝙍𝙀𝙬 and Larrakia in 24-25. Now, is this just a glossy press release, Madam Speaker? Did they really plan to do it? Or did they actually realise that they couldn't do it because they didn't have the money, and that's why it never progressed? And one thing I've always asked myself, Madam Speaker, about this is the fact that the CEO and the executives from Power and Water, along with members of that board, were, I suppose, brave enough to say to me, we can't do this. We can't do it for the money. We should stop. And I actually listened to them, Madam Speaker, because I realised that it was a little bit of a pipe dream, a bit of a fallacy. But I wonder, Madam Speaker, was that same advice from Power and Water given to the Labor Party? And as usual, like they've done with so many projects, just gone, we're not going to accept the advice of the experts, we're just going to plough ahead anyway, and it'll cost what it'll cost, and we'll just go out and we'll borrow the money and we'll put Territorians in more debt just to pull it off. It really does boggle the mind, Madam Speaker. And I also wonder if the Leader of the Opposition is bringing this because it's her name on this press release. And I certainly know that the previous member for 𝙍𝙬𝙬𝙬 was running around, I believe, during the lead up to the election, telling all the people out in that area that they were going to get all their power undergrounded for $60 million. It was never going to happen, Madam Speaker. It was an absolute fallacy and it was an absolute pipe dream. And of course, Territory Labor, the opposition, again, are trying to rewrite history and are saying that we made this decision before the election, which is absolute garbage, Madam Speaker. Absolute garbage. I made the decision, I stick my hand up for it, and I made it many months after the election because the people, the experts who know the system, know what it costs, came to me and said that we cannot do it. If you like, Madam Speaker, I will table this press release. 𝙍𝙀𝙬𝙬𝙬 first cab off the rank for Darwin's underground project from 29 March 2023.
Is leave granted to table this paper? All in favour say aye. It is supported.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Because this contains quite a bit of information that I think the people in the northern suburbs would probably like to know. Because the previous government have been gaslighting them for years. The money was never there to be able to do this project. And of course, the Leader of the Opposition was talking about some of the reprioritisations and savings that we made leading into the election, and she mentioned the convention centre upgrade. Well, I'd like to just touch on that. That convention centre upgrade was part of another dream that was probably going to land Territorians in even more debt around bringing a basketball team to Darwin and basing them here. And the money that Labor had put up for that, when you actually looked into the overall cost, again, it was not costed correctly. And it's the same with the underground power, Madam Speaker. It seems a little bit like Labor's typical accounting. $60 million that allocated to do the underground power, and then, well, I suppose if you look at some of their other press releases, they've got another figure of $290 million. Well, Madam Speaker, that's only $710 million short. I'll repeat that, $710 million short of what it would actually take to do the task and to do it properly. So we've seen that in previous budgets, so I don't know what sort of calculator. I did find a calculator in a drawer of my office when I moved in, Madam Speaker, and I knew that it was a Labor calculator, so I quickly threw it in the bin because I knew that it doesn't work. Because I've seen what they did with their calculators, Madam Speaker. 1 and 1 doesn't seem to equal 2. It might equal 10,000 or 1 million. And again, it beggars belief that Labor have come into this House yet again and are trying to rewrite history on undergrounding of power. Yes, undergrounding of power, I suppose, will happen at some stage, and I think it probably does need to happen. But it's a little bit like our renewables targets here in the Territory. We know it's something that we need to do. It's the right thing to do, Madam Speaker, but we will do it in an economically responsible way. I cannot, in all good conscience, go out and say to the people of the northern suburbs tomorrow, okay, I'm going to underground your power, but I'm going to go away and I'm going to borrow $1 billion to do it, because that's what it would take, Madam Speaker, unless the feds are going to stump up the money, and I don't see them doing that in a hurry. So there's two options there, Madam Speaker. I borrow $1 billion and I put us another $1 billion in debt. And then we look at the interest repayments on that debt into the future and what our children and our grandchildren will have to pay to service that debt. Or the other option is then we have to change the bills for the people in the northern suburbs to cover the cost of undergrounding that power. And I believe the back of an envelope calculations would be in excess of $1,000 per year to pay for that undergrounding of power. And what does that say to the rest of the Territory who want things as well? What we need to do for the Territory needs to be to the benefit of all Territorians. And yes, I think the people of the northern suburbs will, at some stage in the future, need to see that undergrounding of power. And like services across our remote communities in Alice Springs and our other towns in Tennant Creek and Katherine also need works done too. And we have to prioritise those, but it comes down to the budget, Madam Speaker. We need the money to be able to do these things. We need to have them costed properly, not like we've seen here from Labor with $60 million that was going to do it all, and that's what they were telling people in the northern suburbs, or $290 million for all 13 suburbs. The numbers just do not stack up. They just do not stack up. So, really, it's not unsurprising that the opposition want to keep talking about the undergrounding of power, because really all it was back in the day from the previous government was just talk. They never properly funded it. They put out a press release, which I've tabled now, that said they were going to start in 23, 24 and never actually started the job, because I believe that they knew they didn't have the money, it wasn't costed properly, wasn't planned properly, and they were just telling the people in the northern suburbs that they were going to do it, knowing full well that they were not going to be able to do it. And of course, I think Labor lost the northern suburbs because they didn't fight for them in government. But all of a sudden they're back out there trying to fight for them now through this motion before the House around the undergrounding of power. Well, Madam Speaker, I can tell the opposition it's too little, too late. You weren't listening to the northern suburbs in the years leading up to the election in 2024. And I think the people of the northern suburbs can probably see right through you now with what you're trying to do. Because if you were serious about undergrounding the power in the northern suburbs and you were serious about the people in the northern suburbs. You would have started it when you said you were going to start it back in 2023. It's like Territory Labor are just not serious about anything. So, Madam Speaker, I don't know much what I can say on this topic anymore. I spoke at length about it yesterday. I've answered a number of questions in question time about this topic. I don't think Labor like hearing the truth, or they're actually not listening to what we are saying from this side of the House. But yes, I agree, Member for Catherine. I just don't think they're actually listening, because I've said on so many occasions that there was never any plan from the CLP to cease undergrounding of power before the election. Again, that is not true. The decision was made many months after the election, Madam Speaker. Yes, I made the decision on the advice from the experts. And it seems, obviously back in the day, that Labor weren't listening to the experts. So it looks like the opposition leader, through this motion, is continuing to try and gaslight Territorians about what their government was doing, or more precisely, Madam Speaker, what they actually weren't doing for the people in the northern suburbs on this particular topic. So to give, I suppose, as I finish up, to put a couple of things into perspective, Power and Water have provided some estimates on the costs of undergrounding power. Now they've had the time to go away and have, I suppose, a really good hard look at not just the equipment and material costs, but also the labour costs to doing it. So the estimates are based on current unit rates. So to underground HV is $2,260 per metre. That is the current estimate to do that. For low voltage, which is the stuff that we use in our houses, remember that LV and HV travel pretty well on the same poles. One's up the top, one's down the bottom. The low voltage underground installation is around about $2,120 a metre to put that power underground. Now, it's much cheaper when we're building a suburb or we're doing a subdivision, and that planning is put in place at the outset. We can get that power underground. Of course, it is much cheaper to do it in that context. But when we have to come and do it post-installation, so when we have to come and dig trenches up through people's nature strips, go under roads, across roads and all these other things, change transformers and put them on the ground, that is where that cost increase, because it is doing the work afterwards. And again, Power and Water have gone away and done some excellent work on calculating what the actual metres and kilometres are of power lines, both HV and LV, within the northern suburbs. And currently the overhead HV length in the northern suburbs is 68.11 kilometres. That's how much HV there is in the northern suburbs. And the LV in the northern suburbs is 131.52 kilometres. So now we get a bit of an idea on why that cost is so high. I suppose these figures were probably made available to Labor, but yet again, they probably chose not to listen to them. They picked an arbitrary figure of, I said, they had $290 million, but they're only going to spend 60, and telling everybody that they were going to do it all for 60. Well, $60 million doesn't get you very much, Madam Speaker, when you look at those numbers. Well, you're right, Member for Barclay. They're just not honest. They don't listen. They are trying, again, to rewrite history. They're trying to gaslight Territorians and make themselves out to be something than they're not. Because they didn't listen to the people in the northern suburbs, as I said, and all of a sudden they're trying to win back the people out there in the northern suburbs through, I suppose, the only means that they have, which is something that they couldn't even do when they were in government. Over 20 years, the Labor Party has been in government, and in the last 8 years, they had the reins of power, and they had the opportunity to kick this project off and chose not to. And, Madam Speaker, they didn't do it because they knew that their figures were wrong and they weren't going to be able to get it over the line for the money that they had.